Okay, we're with Amar Patnaik, member of the Rajya Sabha, who has published a book called Pandemic Disruptions and Odisha's Lessons in Governance, Public Health, Data Protection and Other Essays. Amar, that's terrific. You've actually put something together over all the years of COVID that you were writing these different essays. I guess they appear in different newspapers and other publications?
That's right. Most of it, in fact 90% of it has appeared in different newspapers.
And since it began in the COVID era, let's start with talking about that, because in many ways, that was such a learning experience for so many of us. You folks in Odisha had experience dealing with cyclones. I remember reading about how the whole cyclone management thing and the way in which you were able to prevent loss of life is seen as a success story by the whole of India. Were there any lessons from that were applied towards COVID management as well?
In fact, precisely, Shashi, it was that which Odisha, in the initial period of the pandemic, initial period of the lockdown, when no such guidelines were available from the government of India, there were no guidance because once in 100 years kind of a pandemic. So we drew inspiration from this, the experience that one had for handling the natural disaster like cyclones. You know that you mentioned that Odisha has actually occupied a place of preeminence in handling natural disasters, not only in India but globally. The UN has applauded because our policy is zero loss of lives. The CM says zero loss of lives. So that we brought forward, and there the biggest component was preparedness. So when we started preparing people, the members of legislature, the symbolic gesture when the CM himself went and washed his hands in the assembly, people were wondering why is he doing that. But actually, we are doing what the government of India did later by, when Modi, Prime Minister, talked about getting people, showing solidarity in one particular action of, taking something and doing together all over the country on the 25th or the 26th of March. So this preparedness aspect is something which was Odisha's forte, and that is what we kicked in. We realized that we have to make people, every household, aware of it. And for that, the mechanism was the health workers normally, but we used the women self-help groups, which after Kerala, it has now occupied such an important part of our governance system. They delivered this message to every household almost in 3 days, I think, which is a record.
It's part of your so-called 5T.
It's a part of the 5T itself is, it in a way explains the entire governance model, which I've written in this book. The T is, one is the transparency, one is the teamwork, which is very important. Another T is technology, and then another T is timeliness. You have to do everything on time, leading to transformation. So that model was, we started, unraveling, unrolling it to the people for the first time in the governance system, the bureaucracy, and saw extremely good results. And that is how we proceeded. And then the National Disaster Management Act came up. People realized that we don't have an Epidemic Diseases Act. It's a very old act which has only 4 pages. I have written about this. I'm sure you would have read about this, the need for a new disaster.
We definitely need one. In fact, even the provisions of the act have been somewhat controversial because they were cited in it was not that act, I beg your pardon, it was the Natural Disasters Act that was cited in riding roughshod over the wishes of the states.
That's right.
Strictly speaking, the central government has no other right to impose a lockdown on the whole country.
So
they did that using an obscure provision of the National Disaster Management.
DMA, and that is when they realized that they could use that provision for everything. That the entire management, if you would say, of the pandemic by the government of India has been limited to that particular provision of the DM Act. And then the states responded. Your state, Kerala, the positivity rate was probably high, but then the health infrastructure, since I was posted there, the health infrastructure at the community level, at the public health PHC level has been so good that, the handling of the pandemic was brilliant. So most of the states performed, and I think it was the later part of the year in the vaccination drive, I think Government of India picked up.
And Odisha was able to do something similar as Kerala? Were they comparable things?
Yes. In fact, Odisha did something probably on model which Kerala should now learn in terms of giving powers to the sarpanches, the collector's power, the district magistrate's power to the sarpanches. So the result was the sarpanches were empowered to ensure that people in the villages, the particular village or 6-7 villages, they followed the first period of the lockdown without any police enforcement, but the community took charge. And anybody who came from the cities to the villages, they were asked by the villagers to stay outside in a house in isolation, self-isolation, which the government didn't have to do. So, in fact, this is a model which Kerala has always believed in, the decentralization of power. So we really did that.
I'm afraid in our case, even though community participation was excellent, ours remained with the IS officers.
That's what I'm saying. So that didn't happen in Kerala. We did that. And I think that is why, because I can tell you that Odisha's public health system at the primary level is not as good as Kerala. But still we managed it, I think, because the community took charge.
Yeah, Kerala is probably better than any other states in the country, with the possible exception of Delhi. So you really have an important thing there. Another subject which you and I have been talking about a lot and working together on is technology. And one issue that we've both been concerned about is the issue of data protection. I see you have some essays on the data protection bill. I myself, before you came into Parliament, had introduced a draft data protection bill as a private member's bill.
Oh, I didn't know about this, yes.
This is before the proposals. It was just after the Justice Sri Krishna bill, which I felt didn't go far enough. And what was interesting, and we both have in common, is that I had proposed an independent data protection authority. One that, in my view, was not going to be constituted of government officials, but rather people from various walks of life, former judges, but also stakeholders.
That's my view. That's what is written.
And that they would have an independent authority.
Absolutely.
Right now, as you know, the government's draft has created a data protection authority, or by some other name.
Data protection board.
Consisted of government officials ruling on decisions taken by other government officials. Now, that's exactly the formula that they have been using for telecoms, where, one set of government officials will authorize the government to tap your telephone. And that has to be then approved by another set of government officials. So if you carry on this way, you will have absolutely no control. I remember the final court of appeal in telecoms is the cabinet secretary. So I asked the retired cabinet secretary, how did this work in practice? And he said, listen, they give me several pages, long list of numbers. You think a cabinet secretary has time to go through all of this? I just sign. That's the reality. That is life.
That's true.
So we can't afford to have that situation with data protection as well. Tell us your vision of how you want this done.
See, the point is, all that you said is true, because I belong to the bureaucracy, as you know. For several years I was there, and I know this is how it functions. But the point is, we have to realize that the law that we're going to make is not just for us. It is the law to which the rest of the world will be looking at, because if data has to come from the United States or data has to come from any other country for processing in India, they should think that you have an independent data protection authority, you have a law which protects the data of their citizens, and then only that process of business cross-border data transfer will take place. I am afraid if we do not provide such an ecosystem, countries after countries, while signing their free trade agreements, will raise this issue, because just as we are worried about sending our data maybe to a country like Afghanistan, some other countries might think that our law is so dependent on the central government that their citizens' data cannot be processed in our country. So I think the bill which has been put up for public consultation, not yet introduced in the parliament, government will revisit the thing. And the second point is, the states generate a lot of data because of the state laws. Why should the center or a central board would be looking at the data which has been generated by state legislation, and it should be a state board who should be looking at it, just like the RTI, just like the Consumer Protection Act. This is what I've been arguing about in the book, and I've written even off late after the new draft was introduced. So I'm in agreement with you on that.
I think certainly both of us in our respective houses should try and make these points clear.
That's right.
During the debate. But unfortunately with this government, once they introduce something approved by the cabinet, they don't consider any changes in it. That's the real frustration. And I'm afraid it will be a case of they propose, we oppose, they dispose. And that will be the end of that. Let's see what...
No, but I'm sure that they realize that the whole world is looking at this. This is a question of, I have argued somewhere that data transfer, I think we need a global order for it, because it will transfer between countries, just like we have the WTO. So I think the government ministry should look at it. They have a very, 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 person who knows the subject in the form of their Minister of State and the Minister himself. So I would think that they would have a look at this, and the consultations that they have carried out to different lot of stakeholders, they would learn from this. They would take some advice and introduce a bill which is much more acceptable. The current form, I think it is. I have written is too simplified for comfort. I've written something.
Interesting. Well, let's talk about that some more the next stage before they actually have a debate in Parliament.
That's right.
But meanwhile, you've also written about artificial intelligence, which is the next big issue. Now, it's very interesting because I just saw last week, after you published your book, that Elon Musk and a few others have called for a moratorium on developing AI for at least 6 months, while people get together and discuss the ethical implications of whether artificial intelligence can continue like this, whether it might really become a danger or a menace to human civilization, whether one should really create something which regulates this effectively. Now, you've given some preliminary thoughts on the subject. How do you see this?
Very right. In fact, I think artificial intelligence algorithms, for the latest product of ChatGPT, it played chess with a number of people, and I think it won. And the Harvard professor, who I don't recall his name immediately, but I think they have expressed apprehension that that should be banned, because otherwise it is actually going to dent the intelligence of human civilization per se over a long period of time. And you have to probably also develop some kind of code of ethics, standardized all over the world. In Europe, they have gone for registration of algorithms, and they are monitoring. But Shashi, the point here is, even if we do all this, technology is moving at such a fast pace. Whether we have the capacity to enforce our regulations is something very important. And I think governments across the world, including ours, probably are not spending that much time. Can 2-3 bureaucrats or 3-4 people look at this entire thing? So we have to look on both the sides. One, to control the supply of AI-enabled applications and all those programs and softwares and applications. But at the same time, we also have to be in a position to ensure that whatever comes up, whatever is allowed under the regulation, one is able to actually enforce the regulations there, and check out all those algorithms or all those AI-based applications which are probably compliant or probably not compliant to the regulations, but probably compliant but affecting humanity to a larger extent, to a section of people, to a section of students, or to even section of farmers. I see Elon Musk is in fact right. So you would also have realized that the implications are huge unless we get our acts together and get into some kind of a global decision on this. The G20 is perfect forum for India to champion this. I think, for example, the G20 should be the forum to talk about a global order on data transfer, to talk about privacy, because it applies to global citizens as well, to the use of AI, use of the metaverse, all these applications. We cannot, or the crypto for that matter.
Well, the problem with privacy is the political context. I mean, obviously, privacy in China is not the same as privacy in Sweden.
Right.
And so you have to, decide which is the more standard you want. I would be in favor of a more liberal standard because I believe in liberal democracy. Some others in the government may prefer a more restrictive standard of privacy because they would like the government to have access to more information about each citizen. So these are also political decisions and not merely regulatory matters. But sticking with AI for a minute, Amar, the challenge with AI seems to be multiple at various levels. What Musk and people are talking about is AI systems running out of control and being able to dominate human beings.
Correct.
As we've seen in Stanley Kubrick's Space Odyssey thing, where the computer essentially tries to take over the world, and one of these fellows goes to try and unplug it, but in the process destroys himself as well. So you've got a situation where AI represents certain kinds of threats that we haven't even fully begun to understand. You talked about algorithms. I'm told that many AI programs can write their own algorithms now.
Yeah, from the data.
They don't need human intervention. Obviously, at some point, somebody had created the original algorithm that programmed all of this. But now apparently it can multiply.
It can learn from the data
much
and just develop its own algorithm
and
refine
so
it.
that's
keep
already
refining.
been invented. That's already before us. Then you've got something like, let's say, student essays, to take one example. How can you watermark an AI written essay in such a way that a teacher knows the student didn't write it? It's impossible.
It's impossible.
We may suddenly find that now the skill of a student in writing is overtaken by the skill of a student in manipulating AI to get the essays he wants.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's going to be a challenge.
What happens to the home assignments that one who's given assignments to write an essay after studying? It will be the AI who will
That's one thing in a developed country, but what about in our country, where some students may be well off enough to have access to AI and some students may not be? Are we going to create a new class divide in our classrooms as a result? Or do we give everyone the same access, and if so, how? That's also going to create new social questions.
Absolutely well said. In fact, there is already a lot of digital inequity in our country. This would actually further accentuate it.
Absolutely. The digital divide.
And the digital divide would probably be much more serious than the income inequity or social inequity that we have. And many of these things could probably actually accentuate each other and exacerbate the situation to mean that the poor actually are further deprived of some of the basic things that the middle class or the rich are getting. So I think I'm quite worried about this, because a lot of things has got into the bandwagon of the digital movement that is taking place. But we are not really addressing the issue of the inequity, both in terms of access to hardware and software and the knowledge.
So we've talked about Odisha's disaster management during the COVID pandemic. We've talked about issues of technology, data protection, AI. Let me cover a couple of two other quick issues before we wrap up. One is, of course, the business that you've touched upon in one of your essays about women and children being particularly victimized during the pandemic. Can you explain that? It's a very original insight that not enough people have written about.
See, the point is, during the pandemic, but the pandemic-induced lockdown, the women of the household, in those cases where they were being abused within the household by their male partners or husbands or whoever. Now, because of the lockdown, they were forced to stay together, and the perpetrator and the sufferer, they were staying together. And if she suffered, then there was no way she could run to the police station to file an FIR, because that was the hardest lockdown that we had. So in one of my essays, I have pleaded for, and I've said that this is something which it came to me from various sources that this was happening, and even in rural areas. So it was left to the sarpanches. It was again left to the community to take care of this. So I was pleading that the community should be more sensitive to this kind of a situation and take care of these women or these girls who were suffering in their households and nowhere to go to for redressal of their grievance because of the lockdown that we have. The regular enforcement mechanism is not available to them. That was one. As far as children are concerned, my concern has been largely because of a couple of things. One, the online education that was delivered to them, that resulted in a lot of children data being stored at different places by data fiduciaries or the people who were delivering these courses. Now, what about the privacy of that of these children? Are we protecting this data? We don't have a data protection law. And what happens at the deep web level if such data is used against the children? So that is one of the concerns, and my concern even remains even now. Because we really haven't addressed that issue.
It's truly sad. I wanted to end on an Odisha note, but also on a more personal note, because I first met you as an audit and accounts man, not as a Rajya Sabha MP, and that's of course your professional bureaucratic background is as an accountant and auditor. How do you see you've got one or two essays on corruption in the book? How do you see Odisha's innovations in this area, and what would you, having worked now in Parliament for a few years, recommend for the central government to take on that would perhaps reduce the amount of corruption that Indian citizens have to face from their officials.
Yeah, I remember. I don't know if you recall that I used to run up to you before joining politics.
That's
I was
right.
the principal accountant general in Kerala, and I was seeking your advice on this. So on corruption, Orissa, I think the first thing is the top leader commitment has to be shown, and I think the whole country recognizes that our Chief Minister Naveen Patnaik, who has been there for 23 years with people's blessing, has been very hard on corruption, including his ministers. You'll be surprised to know that more than 50 ministers were sacked by him on charges of corruption, one way or the other. Bureaucrats, I think, at various levels, about 200 of them have been compulsorily retired. But this has been there right from the beginning. He has followed this. But how has the bureaucracy responded? What has been the pace of disposal of the vigilance? All that has happened. Fortunately, Shashi, you would agree that because of the advent of technology and smartphones and the social media, people have become more cautious. Not to say that this has stopped or reduced the incidences of corruption. It may have reduced the incidences of episodic corruption, but the systemic corruption probably persists. Now, for that, I think technology is a good driver. If you remove the human interventions from any of the benefits that's being delivered to beneficiaries, that would reduce corruption. For example, the direct benefit transfer that is taking place in several of the schemes. So that process should continue. But you see, in a society where, for the bribe taker, there is a bribe giver.
Yeah.
So unless the bribe givers are disincentivized sufficiently, which has now happened because in the PC Act now bribe giver as well as the bribe taker, both will be prosecuted. That has happened. But I think as a community, we also have to respond. The community thinks that as a society, and when I say community, I mean society. The society believes if the society's moral fiber is not very strong, I think no amount of coercive legislation would be in a position to stop the menace of corruption. We can only reduce and do as much. But people like you, people like others who, all of us, if we get together to give that message in our parliament, which we do, because people outside think that MPs and MLAs are probably the most corrupt in the entire political system, which is not true, which is absolutely entirely untrue. Our society itself has to change. And for that, each one of us have a role, and that has to be performed, besides the government doing it alone.
Fascinating. Thank you, Amar. And for all of you watching, to get more insights and more detailed understanding of the issues that Amar Patnaik has tackled in this book, have a look at it. Pandemic Disruptions in Odisha's Lessons in Government, Public Health, Data Protection and Other Essays by Amar Patnaik, sitting right here. Thank you, Amar. Congratulations on your first book.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you.